You'd be surprised by how many people don't have some of these very practical preps. In fact, they get overlooked very often because they're not as exciting as other things we like to focus on here in the preparedness community. But these preps are definitely necessities, and most people just don't even have them. So let's talk about 15 of the most practical preps you wouldn't believe some people just don't have. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about 15 of the most practical preps that people just don't have. These are things that we definitely need, but people tend to overlook because they're not very exciting and they just don't associate some of these items with preparedness. So if you don't want to fall into the category of people who don't have these items, then hit the subscribe button below and I'll do my best to give you some suggestions and information whenever I can about what we can do to better our preparedness. Now, number one on the list is going to be trash bags. A lot of people only have enough trash bags to get to their next grocery store visit. Yet trash bags are extremely useful in any survival situation. They can be used to make repairs, they can be used to make a makeshift shelter, they can also be used for rain covers for a backpack or a poncho or whatever else you might want to use them for. And of course, they're great for putting stuff inside of. So trash bags is something we should have more and more of, and yet a lot of people only have a singular box of trash bags stashed away at their home. So make sure you have plenty of trash bags, and we'll move on to number two. Now number two is going to be fire extinguishers. And just so you're aware, a lot of the items I'm going to talk about today are represented here on the workbench, but if you're interested in getting them because maybe you're lacking some of these items, then I'll put links in the description as well as in the pinned comment so you can make yourself a little bit better prepared by getting some of those things. Now, a fire extinguisher should be a very basic thing. We should all be very aware of the need of a fire extinguisher. Yet I guarantee you that there's many people in your life right now that if you were to ask if they have a fire extinguisher in case their kitchen catches fire, they would answer no. A lot of people don't have a fire extinguisher. So I find them to be very important. You should definitely have more than one fire extinguisher, but at least one. And a lot of people don't even have that. And clearly they're very practical, and you'll use this more likely than some of those other tools we like to talk about here in the preparedness community. Just my 2 cents. Moving on to number three is going to be carbon monoxide detectors. Now, a lot of people don't have a carbon monoxide detector, and often it's because they don't really use anything that might allude to the idea of having carbon monoxide poisoning. For example, they might not use propane heat in their home or something along those lines. Yet carbon monoxide is still a threat, and if they ever find themselves in a grid down scenario and start using a generator they've never touched once before in their life, suddenly that carbon monoxide risk becomes much higher. So having one carbon monoxide detector could at least make the difference of surviving a poisoning event between you and your family. These are things you definitely need to have, and a lot of people don't. Just because it isn't a risk for you in most of your daily activities doesn't mean it's not something that is worth a $25 investment just to make sure you're squared away. So number four on the list, we'll move on from there, is going to be nitrile gloves or vitrile or vinyl or whatever it is. Generally not latex just because of allergies, but have exam gloves of some kind. Gloves are extremely useful. Yes, they can be used for intermittent cleanings whenever you're doing something that might be considered dirty work. They keep your hands protected from harsh chemicals. You can use them when treating a wound of some kind and not have to worry about cross-contamination or getting blood on your hands or anything like that. And yet a lot of people don't have any gloves like that at all. They might have maybe a box, but you should definitely have more than one box because nitrile gloves are disposable. So obviously they're only one-time use. At the same time, gloves are just important in general because being able to wash your hands during an SHTF scenario might not be very accessible. So being able to wear gloves when you're doing something dirty and then remove them and still have relatively clean hands can be a benefit. Something people don't have, they definitely should, okay? Now, number five is going to be pet food. Now, people have pet food, but they generally don't prepare to have extra pet food on hand. And the reason behind that is because they just don't think about it. But obviously, if you have animals, you need to be ready to feed them in any kind of an emergency event. So have additional dog food or cat food or whatever it is that you're feeding, and make sure that you have enough to get through an emergency for those pets. Now, if you want a pro tip, don't stock expensive blue buffalo, wild-caught salmon, whatever it is, for your dog in an apocalyptic event. Make sure you're getting the cheaper stuff like Purina Dog Chow, because at $23 for a 50-pound bag, you can't really beat it for stockpiling. And if your dog is going to have to eat that food during those times, it's better than no food at all. It saves you money, it allows you to stock in larger quantities, and at the end of the day, if you're going to be eating beans and rice every single day of your life, you should probably have your dog at least eating some of the cheaper dog food, right? I'm just throwing it out there. Now, Moving on from there, so number 6 on the list is going to be a landline phone. A lot of people don't have a landline phone, and it's understandable. We pay for cell phones, it's expensive already, we have internet, we don't generally use our landline anymore, right? But landline phones can actually still operate in certain grid down scenarios. And there's a lot of situations where the power is out, but the landline still works. And imagine being able to communicate with people in the outside world because you have a landline when nobody else does. It could be a game changer in an emergency situation. And landline plans are generally very cheap. So having a landline is probably worth the additional investment because it's one more form of communication that will probably function during a grid down event, and at the same time it gives you another reason to give a phone number to telemarketers that you don't want to talk to. So just throwing it out there, a landline phone is a great idea for preparedness, and yet most people don't have one, okay? Moving on from there, number 7 is going to be an air compressor. Now this is just like a little dinky air compressor right here, but it does a job. It's meant for lawnmower tires, right? But having a way to reinflate tires is huge. And we all have vehicles, we have bicycles, lawnmowers, wheelbarrows, whatever it is that you have an inflatable tire on is something you're going to want to be able to upkeep during any kind of an emergency. And if you can't refill a flat tire, then you are going to be SOL when it comes to being mobile. So have a way to refill tires, and obviously certain compressors are strong enough to fill some of those larger tires, whereas trying to use a bike pump might not do the trick. So having an air compressor is huge, and yet you'd be surprised by how many people don't have them at all. So this is a really small one, but it's at least better than nothing. Get something so you can reinflate a tire. Super practical, but do you have one? Moving on from there, in the same realm is going to be jumper cables. Now jumper cables are a basic thing. Almost everyone thinks you just have jumper cables, right? I guarantee you that like 75% of drivers out there are driving around without any jumper cables at all in their vehicle. It's crazy, but it's true. Jumper cables are extremely useful. Your battery going dead is a more likely thing to have happen than almost any other emergency event we talk about, and yet so many people don't even own jumper cables. So make sure you have some. I mean, they're very inexpensive and you should have them in every vehicle. Imagine asking for a jump from somebody in a parking lot, but you can't even provide your own cables. And that's so many people's situation. So don't be one of those people. Make sure you have jumper cables. Being able to get your car up and running literally can be the difference of survival in many situations. So moving on from there, number 9 is going to be a sewing kit, right? And here's a tiny little sewing kit that you can get for like $1, which I use for bug out bags. But this is perfect because the needles are already pre-threaded and they have enough thread on them for basic repairs. And being able to repair clothing or even other materials like your tent or your backpack during an SHTF event could be a game changer. And yet, how many people don't even have a spool of thread or a needle at all? A lot. You will be very surprised because a lot of people don't know how to sew, so they never even thought about buying sewing materials just because they don't know how to use them. But either way, having them is better than not having them, and especially when you can get something like this for like $1, why wouldn't you? So these are things that you should definitely have, but people just don't. I'm serious. You would be really surprised. Ask people. You'll be surprised, okay? Moving on from there, number 10 is going to be bug spray. Bug spray is huge. In any kind of an emergency event, bugs are a problem. We want to keep them off us, they're very uncomfortable, and of course you have things like mosquitoes that spread diseases like malaria or Zika or whatever else it might be, and that can cause you huge problems if hospitals are not suddenly accessible. So make sure you have a way to keep the bugs away, and if you've ever been in an outdoor environment for a long period of time, you know that bugs are the worst part about it. So if you can keep bugs off you and your family, everything's just a little bit more comfortable, and I think that that's actually a little bit more important than what a lot of people give weight to. So that being said, have bug spray. A lot of people don't have any because they don't generally use it in their daily life, so they just assume they don't need it. But that doesn't mean you might not need it at some point in time. Definitely have bug spray on hand and get the good stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Now, moving on from bug spray, we're gonna go to number 11, which is going to be salt. You just need salt. Iodized, probably not the worst to have these days, but either way, salt is huge, and a lot of people don't have very much salt. They maybe have enough salt for a salt shaker in their kitchen, or they maybe have one of these 1-pound containers of salt to refill their table salt container, but at the end of the day, that's not enough salt. You need a ton of salt for an SHTF event. It has multiple uses, including preservation, medical uses, and it also is important for your body. You need it nutritionally for your nervous system to function correctly. And anytime I've mentioned salt in a video before, people have said that, hey, I haven't heard that in many places, and I appreciate you mentioning it. But at the end of the day, people still don't have enough salt. So it needed to be talked about once again, and it is something that's important. If you don't have a 25-pound bag of salt, which can be easily delivered right to your front door, maybe you should order one. But either way, get some more salt. It's extremely important, all right? Now, number 12 is going to be a little controversial just because of the times we're living in, but a siphon. Have a siphon because you never know when you're going to have to get liquid out of one container and put it into another. Yes, I know people are using siphons maliciously lately, especially when it comes to fuel. However, getting fuel out of a container that you otherwise wouldn't have access to during an SHTF event could be a game changer of survival. And so having a siphon, even if it's a homemade one, is a good idea. Yet some of the commercial siphons at least have protections and stuff on them to make them a little bit more pleasant to use. But either way, having a siphon is important, and it's not always just about gasoline. Sometimes it's about accessing fresh water out of some kind of a container or a tank that you might not be able to access otherwise. So those are good things to have for survival, and a lot of people don't own a siphon. I mean, like, most people don't own a siphon. It is what it is, and especially nowadays, people think, you know, siphon equals criminal, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. You can't beat them, join them. So, moving on from there, we're gonna go to number 13, which is actually gonna be bolt cutters. Now, bolt cutters are extremely useful, and of course they can get you into just about anywhere you need to go. You can get through a padlock, you can get through a fence, and imagine having access to fresh water on the other side of a chain link fence or a padlocked gate, and you can't get to it, and that's the difference of you surviving or not. But yet a bolt cutter would allow you to get into it very easily. And those are things you have to consider, and yet most people don't own bolt cutters at all. If they don't use them in the sense of their profession, or if they don't have a reason to have them in their toolbox, they just don't buy them because it's money that they don't feel is well spent, and they haven't really thought of a reason for why they would ever need to cut a lock or a bolt or anything like that. Trust me, they're extremely good to have. They're called a key to the city for a reason, and at the end of the day, you can get some very small ones that can fit in a backpack, aren't too heavy. Yeah, they can't cut some of the bigger locks or anything like that out there, but they can definitely handle chain link fence and small locks, and that's still better than nothing. So do yourself a favor, get some bolt cutters. You never know when you're going to need to access something that you would otherwise not have access to. Now, number 14 is going to be shoe goo. Shoe goo is basically glue that affixes your sole back to your shoe if it ever tries to come apart. And that's huge in a survival situation. You will hear from anybody who's been through any kind of a long-term SHTF scenario that shoes and keeping your feet healthy is extremely important to survival, right? And at the end of the day, if you don't have a way to bring more shoes with you, which would be a lot of extra weight for the just-in-case scenario, or at the same time, if you can't access new shoes very easily, if you're like me and wear a 15, then shoe goo can be a game changer because that can make the life of your shoes last almost twice as long in some cases. And what that does is it allows you to fix your shoes in the field without having to have any specialty tools or anything. And a small tube of shoe goo is relatively lightweight and inexpensive. So having it would be a good idea, yet how many of you truthfully can say you own shoe goo? Just throwing it out there. Okay, and number 15 on this list, which is very important because it allows me to have access to something that I find to be extremely necessary for survival. And just as a reminder, like I said, a lot of these items are going to be in the description as well as in the pinned comment if you're interested in stocking up on anything. And at the end of the day, I do appreciate any support you guys bring to this channel because honestly, all I'm trying to do here is give you as much advice as I can in these times of turmoil. Now, number 15 is going to be a French press. You gotta have coffee, or at least I do, and if I don't, you're not gonna wanna be around me during an SHTF scenario. So a French press is great because basically it lets you make coffee and all you have to do is have boiling water. So no electricity needed, you're not gonna have to run propane or anything like that unless that's how you're boiling the water. But at the end of the day, you can boil water, even over an open flame if you need to, and then use the French press and bam, you have coffee. And even if you don't drink coffee, imagine being able to supply somebody who does with coffee, and the amount of trust and loyalty that that suddenly breeds is so important that you could definitely be the king of coffee all of a sudden. This is important because honestly, I look forward to having coffee during the apocalypse, and I hope that you all do too. It's going to be really nice to have. You need some comforts once in a while, and I think coffee is going to be mine. But a French press allows me to make coffee easily without having to worry about a Mr. Coffee or a K-cup thing or any of that kind of stuff, right? So hopefully these practical preps were very eye-opening to you because a lot of people don't have them. And if you have other ideas about practical preps, leave them in the comments below. Let me know the other items that are also practical that a lot of people don't have, because 15 is not the full number, I guarantee you that. There's tons of preps that are practical that nobody stocks up on. And these are important things for us to talk about because it allows us to grow as a community and be more prepared. If you have anything else for me, go to magicprepper.com, send me a contact form. Otherwise, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.